You looked up some other themes. Tell me about those. I looked up the 7 sins and the 7 virtues. The man moved a bishop to pressure a castle. And these are the sets: pride, humility, greed, charity, lust, chastity, envy, gratitude, gluttony, temperance, wrath, patience, and sloth, diligence. What about them? They are what they are. They reflect the structure that created them. They are the relationships that characterize and define a certain way of being. I'm not saying that's how I see things, nor am I saying it's not. But it is interesting to look at how a society develops as a result of its guiding framework. Start at the beginning. Pride and humility. These are set as sin and virtue. Pride is sin, humility is virtue. I mean, if you want a certain result, then that set will give you a certain result. So do you not agree with that set as a guiding basis? It's too simplified. Not that I mind simplified. Perhaps I think it is simplified in the wrong way. Why should pride be considered the worst characteristic, or humility, conversely, I suppose, the greatest? If someone feels pride when they shouldn't, then fine. And who wouldn't feel humility in the presence of something divine? People live in the real world, a relative world. Where man has achieved something genuinely good in this world, if he has made something stronger, more beautiful, should he not feel pride? I guess I just don't see that this relationship is necessarily one of good and evil, or whatever. People should be humble where it is right for them to be humble. If someone else knows more about something, then shut the fuck up and listen. But if they don't know everything, and they don't, then don't be so diminished in pride that you can't stand up and say that's bullshit. It bothers me that people should be told not to take pride in themselves, when in fact I consider it the duty of each person to better themselves, to become stronger, more knowledgeable, more aware. It is through those actions, those practices, that people increase in beauty, and to do that is to honor balance and harmony. I've always thought of horses as prideful creatures. That is to say, they are proud. I once saw pride actually embodied. It was in a horse, in the hills of the old country. The horse was in mist. It stood a certain way. It personified pride. It was awesome to see. I could never after that see pride as a sin. Forever after that, pride was about self-belief, about knowing the ground, about having access to a profound fundamental power. My response was to get stronger, to stand taller, to educate myself, to spend time walking in wind and rain so that I would know. Pride is a feeling of standing with storm. And opposite that, humility? To know pride is not to shun humility. Humility is knowing death. There is no pride without humility. You can't stand with storm without feeling yourself to be a speck, less than a speck, not even a speck, and yet you stand with storm. People generally do not understand humility at all. The scope of view is so slim, and yet in one sense it is appropriate. Amongst people, who doesn't know there is always someone who knows more, or who is stronger or wiser. And even if you know more in one area, someone else knows more in another. And people aren't always what they seem, and sometimes people are far more than they seem. That is correct humility in the human context. It's knowing enough to know you don't know shit. It's what you learn when you watch someone argue something with passion, and all the while you know something that makes them simply empirically wrong. And you realize you've done the same thing, probably more often than you would like to admit, even to yourself. Humility is knowing that we are not all far off the apes we come from. It is knowing, or rather, having a visceral sense of just how infinitely far from perfection we all are, and that no amount of clothing or public image management will change that. Humility is looking around at what humans do, the way humans treat one another, the way we treat our living environment, and recognizing we are not collectively particularly bright. In fact, collectively we are the most dangerous creatures on the planet. Humility is not thinking that God looks like you. How much of that do people achieve? Then there's another aspect to consider. The notion of humility has expanded so far as to consider that humility should be apportioned equally and in any context. And you find people who should reasonably feel pride in their achievement, and they use that pride to empower leadership towards further achievement instead of doing the opposite. And the wise cower, and the knowledgeable cower, and the strong cower, all in order not to offend. It's stupid. Clearly people should respect others, but for that in them which should be respected, and only that, and only to that extent. Pride and humility are ultimately about respect, respect for the self to the extent deserved, and respect for that which is better so it may act as a beacon. The man went quiet. After a few moments, the Wraith said, I believe greed and charity are the next of those you mentioned.